we're going to jump into the short-term rental thing here in a second, but
Yeah.
like you have experience all over the country. So what's it like to run a restaurant in Kelowna compared to other places?
There's very few places in the world that I could say that I've been to and traveled to that I think would be as challenging as Kelowna. And that's for lots of reasons. I mean, right off the bat, seasonality.
Yeah.
And I know that Kelowna is obviously experiencing growth, and actually maybe not in the last year, but had been experiencing pretty amazing growth for years. And I know
Yeah.
that there's a great Kelowna 2040 plan. And I had lots of chats with the previous mayor when he was in office, and a couple
Yeah.
chats with the current mayor about where Kelowna is going. And I think for me and for what I've experienced with restaurants, is just the swings of the busy season and slow season are just really tough to take in all aspects, whether that be revenue and cash management and inventory and all that, or whether it be on the other side of that with, like staffing and keeping good staff. And every year having to have this hiring cycle where you go, even with small restaurants, like Salt and Brick in the winter and Jack's in the winter, I think our first or second winter, I might have had like 10 staff total between the two places. So if someone's sick or anything like that happened, that was always a challenge. And then you got to scale up in the summer. So I always have found that seasonality played into it. The fires 1000% play into it. We used to be a partner with a wedding venue for Salt and Brick, and it was a huge piece of our business for several years. But like August weddings just stopped happening. It was part of the reason the partnership ended up changing, was because like you truly like one of the months of the year. So again, hiring a chef and then having one or two weddings in all of August for him to work, or her to work, wasn't enough. So I definitely think the fires are a challenging part of Kelowna. And like when we have 2 years in a row without major fires, like I believe that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing for the real estate. I think it's a good thing for tourism. There are a lot of people in Alberta that I know personally that have places in Kelowna that had that same mentality of like, we'll go to Kelowna for the summer until the first fire hits, and then we might not come back for the rest of the summer unless it can be contained. Those ones were probably the seasonality, the second one. And then, yeah, we can talk about the short-term rentals when you want, but because I had a property that's a short-term rental, I have a restaurant in a building that had short-term rentals above it that had to convert, and then obviously had multiple other businesses in the city. Like I can definitely speak to my true opinions on the short-term rental changes.
All right. Well, let your true opinions fly. Were you just affected immediately as soon as this thing came down?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a pretty transparent guy when it comes to numbers and things with business,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's any reason to kind of usually hide back. But
Yeah.
we basically experienced an over 30% drop at Diner Deluxe below, the shores across from Gyro there,
Yeah.
like overnight. Like almost our whole drop was May 1 of last year until August 31 or maybe September 30th. It was almost all contained in those months. The rest of the year, we were kind of flat. Actually, we were trending really well going into it. And that building at 1% last summer, I'm pretty confident, was at 12% occupancy because they were converting from a short term rental to a long term rental building. So it was very clear and apparent that, like, hey, this isn't something we're really doing wrong as operators. I had the same chef, I had a very similar staff. We've been able to claw back some of those numbers this summer. Same team as well. So I look back at that $300,000 dip and be like, that was almost entirely related to short-term rentals. I'm sure there was a component of it related to the fires. There's a component of it related to economic, micro and macroeconomic conditions and
Yeah.
inflationary times. Overall, I was like, look back at it, I go like short-term rentals is what did that. And you just look at all these purpose-built buildings that have restaurant retail spaces in them that can't lease them because they're not allowed to do short-term rentals currently. And it's just, again, to me, it looks abundantly clear. And there's been some great studies. There's a big one out of New York that was comparing a long-term building above you as a tenant to a short-term building, and Airbnb did the study. So maybe it's a little skewed in their favor, but the end result was like, as an operator of a restaurant in a building with short-term rentals, I should expect 2 to 3 visits a week from each unit. From a long-term rental building, it's 2 to 3 a month. So like 75% traffic down right there, just if you're relying on that. And I think when I go back to my frustrations on the changes is I never buy my house in McKinley if I thought those changes would come into effect. I never probably do a restaurant in a building that has been approved for short-term rentals either. So that's where maybe some of my bitterness and tone comes from it. The other one I would say on short-term rentals that I've just really seen is obviously the effect on downtown. At the end of the day, like we were one of the biggest proponents of the Meet Me on Bernard program. We were a huge
Yeah.
fan of that. Like we loved it. We really wanted it to get to where the previous mayor wanted it, which was that you could have open alcohol and it could be
Yeah.
more of like almost like a European vibe. We loved that idea. And last year I didn't even do the extended patio at Salt and Brick. So that, to me, it went from being this huge positive and it's just like to actually being a negative because there was costs obviously we incurred with those extended patios. And I was like, I lost money by doing that extended patio in 2024. So in 2025, I
Yep.
opted against it. So again, we're just not seeing that downtown traffic like we used to. And as mentioned earlier, some of that downtown traffic, especially during COVID, was almost a negative for our city and got us highlighted on national news a couple times. And I don't know if that's the change. We really thought maybe this summer with the tariffs and stuff, we would see an upswing, but
But like people buying Canadian.
yeah, I think we saw some of it for sure. Like I
Yeah.
said, two of the three businesses I have in Kelowna are up.
Yeah.
So, that is a positive sign, but they're not up to the levels of 2 years ago where they were, before the fires, before the short-term rentals. And my last comment on the thing is I just have never understood the inclusion of like luxury properties in short-term rentals. At the end of the day, I fully support the idea. Like most of my staff relies on, better, cheaper accommodations. Most of my staff are multiple people in a house or two people sharing a condo. Like I fully get that there's a need for, let's call it sub $2,000 in our market housing, but
Yeah.
like someone who owns a $2 million home, they're not going to take that hit. And there's not enough people that are going to take the hit to have that trickle down effect happen. So what I saw with that was all the large groups of friends that I have coming in from Calgary stop coming because they weren't going to do six guys or six girls in a hotel room at the Delta Grand and pay more money than they
Yeah.
paid the year before for a $5 million mansion, right? So that was the other one. That was my final thought on short-term rentals.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton to unpack there. My question is, I thought the Shore, was that still not operating as a short-term rental building because it's like a commercial hotel use? No?
No, even their license got adjusted or whatever. So I would tell you 1000% when I went to my landlord for rent relief, when we saw the drop, he was like, I'm losing a lot more than you are, Casey.
I think almost like the narrative that Airbnb is basically dead here just limits people's investigation and coming here in the first place. Like, oh, why would we go there? Like no one wants to sniff around for like the 400 units that are available when there was 2,500 abundantly available before.